have me at a loss, Mr.
My name is Orion. I fled from the fire pits of Apocalypse to warn you. He's coming.
Who is?
Darkseid.
All right, well, we are back. So this is, I'm Jason Horn, this is Longboxer. And again, we are talking with Tim Callahan.
Hey, everybody.
About New Gods. So this will be issues 3 and 4 this time. Thank you, everybody who watched our first video. I enjoyed editing it and listening to it. And even though I caught at least twice that I refer to the Eternals as the Celestials, which I've done before in real life.
Well, you were referring to the Celestials, but you didn't say the comic book series titled The Celestials.
That's true.
You could have just been talking about, while reading the Eternals, the Celestials were such a huge impact on your life.
That's right. They were. It's a good name, though. So I don't know if there's ever been a book just called The Celestials, but I would read that book.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, I just got through reading, rereading, because I've read all this before, but I just literally got through reading issue 4, which was literally like the Scooby Gang goes on an adventure again.
It's great. Yeah, the series takes a big swerve in issue 3, and then it continues in issue 4. Whole new direction from issues 1 and 2 of the New Gods.
Yeah, it's crazy, like how. The first issue is like the Bible. It's so epic, and it's a lot of setup, but it's this grandiose galactic kind of stuff, and then it turns into the thing that it shows is this. The Darkseid has brought the war, not only reignited the war, but brought that war to Earth, and that's what we get a lot of in these issues, which is it's good. I love it, but yeah, it's not. It doesn't have the heft and the grandiose galactic kind of feel that first issue specifically had.
Yeah, and we'll get into it when we talk about the specific issues, but I have to confess, it wasn't until the Superman animated series of the 90s that I really understood the role Intergang played. I read these comics in the 80s, but I hadn't read the other Fourth World stuff. So I kind of missed that Intergang was using apocalyptic technology, or technology from Darkseid. And that was the whole thing. That's what Orion's trying to stop. And I didn't really understand that, I guess, when I was a kid. And the Superman animated series was the best depiction of Intergang being this intermediary between Darkseid and the streets of New York City or Metropolis.
Yeah, same. Well, I didn't actually read it before I watched the animated series, the Superman the animated series. So Superman the animated series was my initial exposure to this story, essentially, because we talked about last time, I was familiar with Darkseid and that stuff and the Apocalypse stuff with the Super Friends cartoon, but watching, I'd never heard of the inner gang and all that stuff until the animated series. So that was I had no idea about any of that stuff until I saw the cartoon.
Yeah, and I was a huge fan of the Batman animated series, and everybody obviously regards that as a high watermark of animation, especially superhero animation. But I always loved that Superman animated series because to me it's the best Jack Kirby adaptation ever. It really goes into the Jack Kirby stuff in a way that the other animated superhero shows just never got to.
Yeah, I actually I was just looking at some clips of it the other day of specifically the Orion stuff, but then also caught the, I don't know if you watched all of it, you probably did, the Justice League Unlimited stuff that they did later as well. Yeah. They ended that entire series with a huge battle between Superman and Darkseid.
Yep. Yeah, that was I love that whole run, all that Bruce Timm stuff. Love it.
I was thinking, when I was watching that, I was thinking like how great it would have been to have gotten like a fight like that between Orion and Darkseid, as opposed to the Superman was one of the main characters of the show, so obviously it would be him. But
yeah,
that epic fight that we never got because these comics were canceled.
Exactly, decades in the making.
Yep. I was thinking today, so if you look back when Kirby's at Marvel and he's creating all these things, like all the Spider-Man, or not Spider-Man, but like Thor and X-Men and just Hulk, all of it, all of those books did fine when he left. It wasn't Kirby after he left, but those titles, even though it was, he was the genesis of a lot of that stuff, those titles endured fine without him. But this stuff, New Gods, it didn't. We've talked a little bit about the post New Gods stuff. It just, I wonder, what do you think that is? I was thinking is it because this is Kirby Unfiltered? This is stuff that it was all him, and just no one could live up to that. Or maybe it was because this was never finished, and it was a series that was canceled, and it had like without it had a specific goal, like this big, like we're saying, this big battle between Orion and Darkseid, and it just never happened. And so everyone's been like chasing that ghost that just never it could just never deliver in the same way.
That's a good question. The 60s Kirby stuff from Marvel, I guess maybe it just had more momentum. So Fantastic Four had 100 issues, and then whenever Stan Lee and John Buscema followed it, essentially, which was a pretty strong team, it had enough momentum. And one of the things about readership, as you know, and the direct market proves, is that it's the habit of buying comics. And even before the direct market, I'm sure people were in the habit of buying certain comics, and they had their titles that they liked. I think that habit was able to be sustained even if Kirby wasn't on the comics anymore. But I think you saw a little bit of that with X-Men, because X-Men never really was a huge success. It floundered. It was canceled. So you can kind of see that some parts of Kirby stuck and maintained their momentum, and then some parts of Kirby Marvel really didn't. And I think it has to do with the number of consecutive issues and just kind of the broad mainstream appeal. And X-Men may have been too weird to have that until Claremont reinvigorates it with the new X-Men. But I think it has to do with the number of issues. So New Gods never had a chance to maintain any kind of momentum. And it must have really been confusing to follow at the time. As we talked about in our last episode, we mentioned that you'd have to piece together the story because it's unlikely you'd have found every issue of the Fourth World on the newsstand.
Yeah, that's a good point about the amount of issues. That's something I didn't think about, but it's pretty obvious that just, Spider-Man and Thor, all those books have been around forever. So of course, not Spider-Man, but again, all those books had years and years of readers built up. So that makes sense because this had 11 issues.
Yeah.
So like Mr. Miracle goes on longer because it had like 18 issues. Now, what do you think that's about? Do you think was that character like more appealing, or did DC like that title more so they left it going, or like what is that about?
I don't know. I think maybe if we have some viewers who can give us some good reference on this, I don't actually know the answer to that. I haven't read anything that explains why all the other New God stuff was shuttered and Mr. Miracle limped along under Kirby and then continued with other creators after that for another half dozen issues or so. I don't know why that was, and I never read anything that fully explained it. There's even competing discussions about exactly what happened with the cancellation of New Gods and why that happened. So I don't know. I don't know what the definitive source on that would be. That is interesting because Kirby did continue it for about half a year more.
Yeah, I've not read. I mean, I've done a lot of research in the last few weeks, and I've not seen anything. I didn't even realize how many issues it went until I was reading about it. But yeah, I'd heard one of the things I'd come across as far as like why the Fourth World was canceled was about. So DC had recently changed their format of like. They had to change their format. They upped their price and then added more pages, but the added pages were a lot of reprints, and people did not like that, and they stopped buying. That's what one source said.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on that era of DC publication history.
Me neither. I do know that I've seen like DC books where it's like, and maybe even Marvel books too, where it's like you're reading a good story, like modern for whenever it came out. But then you'd be seeing like stuff from the 40s reprinted in the back, and you're like, okay, this was not. I can imagine like if you've paid for more pages, that's not the pages you want.
Yeah, I don't know. Although at the time there was no other way to read those stories. Now it's pretty easy to find almost any story you want, and it's not even that hard to find any story you want in print. You could probably track it down. But back then, it would have all been lost, and the circulation of readership, the cycle of readership would have turned over every 5 years or so. So people would have had no memory, which is why it seems so crazy that the time between the early 70s and the mid 80s seems like 2 generations of readership, but 2005 to now seems like yesterday. It has to do with the way readership just was turning over like crazy on the newsstand distribution. And now with the direct market, it's like one long era that began in the 80s and has continued for 35 years.
And it's funny that like that's one of the things that Kirby, was trying to fight against was with this series was comics were just seen as disposable, which seems bonkers to us, but it's just, here and gone. and not, I mean, people collected to a degree, but like it's, there was no direct market. There was no, like I have shelves of long boxes right behind me. There was just no industry or thought to, keeping huge collections other than like the few crazy people that did it.
Yeah, and the idea of creating comics in that environment, or someone like Kirby who's creating these masterpieces of art that are purely disposable. There's no sense from the greater world or even within the comic book community that these things would last. They're really disposable, and the amount of work and love that went into the creation of these things, I can't even conceive of it. Now you think about it, you're working on a graphic novel or something for a couple of years, and you're like, okay, this is going to remain in print forever. And maybe it doesn't, but that's the expectation, that it will always be there. And that was never the expectation for comics. The expectation for comics was you draw the issue, you churn it out, you move on. They take your art, you never see your art again. It's destroyed. What a just total ephemeral process it used to be.
Yeah, I wonder, because you always hear about the way people look down on comics, and even people still do, but like in our world that sounds crazy. But how much of it was because of that? Because it was just like, it was like a newspaper. It was just here and gone. Like how much of the way people didn't think of it as art is because it was just this disposable medium.
The analogy to newspapers is good, because if you picture a house with newspapers piled up, you're like, oh, that's a crazy person, or that's a hoarder. The idea of holding on to newspapers is preposterous. But comics are basically the same, and we're certainly considered to be the equal of newspapers for decades. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, newspapers for kids. Those are just kids' newspapers.
Exactly, not even as fancy as newspapers. Yeah.
Speaking of them, that made me think of this story. Did you hear about like this was years ago, I think. Somebody was like tearing down a wall in an old house, and someone had used newspaper for insulation, and they were just going through them, just like stacks of like packed in like newspaper, and in it was an old Superman comic. I can't remember. It wasn't like #1, but it was a really early issue, and it sold for a ton of money.
No, I did not hear that. That's a classic story.
Yeah. I'd never heard of people like using newspaper and comics for insulation, but I thought that was kind of like, that's how disposable this medium was. Yeah. It was just like fodder to like wrap fish in or put in stuff in your wall to keep warm.
Yeah, and here we are talking about it 50 years later.
I know, it's crazy. One of the other things I wrote down that I've been thinking about with these new gods was, I wrote down, what does it say about humanity that all of our depictions of the gods, like whether it's like Greek gods or Norse gods or whatever, or now these new gods, is all of these tales that we've created are just essentially like stories about family dysfunction. Like, what does that say about us?
That's a good point. I wonder, so is Kirby tapping into those ancient stories of the gods, and that's where the idea of the family dysfunction comes from? Or is it an essential characteristic of humanity that we create these larger-than-life heroes? Because even if they're not gods, if gods are a way to tell a story, and the way we tell stories often are about families, or it's either about leaving families or reuniting with families or conflict with families, yeah, that's an essential human struggle, and the gods reflect that, I guess. It's
funny that like you would think in a world where someone just creating their god, like they're better, like you would think they would be above it all, but it's all the stories are of gods are people like having family issues, and that's what's wrapped up in this whole tale.
Yeah, and Kirby always walks that line between humanizing the new gods and making them seem godlike. And I don't know that he really sticks with it all the way through. I think he calls them gods, but you don't necessarily see them with godlike powers. They're just beings that are superior to humans in terms of power, even if not, they have the same ambitions that humans have, they have the same flaws that humans have. Their power is greater. They're not gods in the traditional sense, but he uses that term, and he does seem to push it as if they are the descendants of the prior gods.
Yeah, it's one of the things I was thinking about, like, he calls it, it's new gods. They're called gods, but like, who worships these people? Like, what are they? They seem a lot like superheroes. Like, to the untrained eye, they seem like superheroes. So I'm not sure, he doesn't really go into that, other than like this connection to the source, which in DC, like, once they're kind of like later on, once like they're kind of brought into the DC fold, the source is referred to at times as like, the creation of the entire DC universe. It's referred to in those terms in a few series. But like other than their connection to the source, I don't really know what makes them gods, because in a world where comics, they're in the same universe as Superman, because Jimmy Olsen's over there, doing stuff with these people. So it's like they're in that same world. So what's different between Orion and Superman?
Yeah, I don't have an answer. I guess if you get metafictional, going to your point about the source, if the source is the creation of this fictional universe, so the source is Jack Kirby or creators of comic books, if that's the source, then these are gods because they're the ones worthy of being written about by the source. They're imbued with power by the creator, which is the comic book creator, and the other characters don't have as much personality. They don't have as much imbued within them as these gods do. But I think you're right about the worship. Even the Hunger Dogs on Apocalypse, who should, in theory, be worshiping, whether they're worshiping out of fear or out of hope, they should be worshiping the new gods. They don't. There's no worship seen in any of the issues. It's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, who's going to Apocalypse Church? I don't know.
Right. If anything, they seem to worship these abstract ideas that are not exactly embodied in these supposed gods. But yet there's still something about them that is godlike. Kirby, especially when we get to the Black Racer. The Black Racer seems above mortal ken, right? He's something different. He's not just a superhero in any way. He is a godlike force.
Yeah, and we can get into that. So that's the start of issue 3. It's the introduction to the Black Racer, which is essentially this embodiment of death. And later, like I said, again, once these ideals are incorporated into DC, like he's the death for the DC universe to an extent. Before Neil Gaiman's character of death, we had the Black Racer. What are your thoughts on the Black Racer?
You're right. He serves the exact same purpose as Neil Gaiman's death. He's not a goth chick. Instead, he is, what you'd expect from an embodiment of death, which is a black man with red and blue skis and a yellow cape and a medieval knight's helmet. That's usually how death is depicted throughout mythology, right? As a skier who flies through space.
Yep, definitely. That's what I've always envisioned. One of the things I thought about was one of the unfortunate things, because the Black Racer is such an interesting character, but one of the weird things is, like many other black characters, is black in the name, like Black Lightning, Black Panther, Black Vulcan from Super Friends, and Black Racer. It's unfortunate thing. I don't really get why that happened, like other than the obvious, I guess, but like it's a weird thing.
It's really weird, and you can see what Kirby's going for, because he obviously, there's some connection to the Silver Surfer. The skiing makes absolutely no sense unless you realize it's the same guy who created a being who can surf through outer space and was a herald of Galactus with the power cosmic. If you have that as a precursor, a guy who skis through space seems like a logical next step. Otherwise, it's even more preposterous, and it doesn't really work. I mean, it works visually. It's a pretty cool visual. But he's got those ski poles, and ski poles are not necessary when you're flying through the spaceway, because there's no moguls to hit in space. There's no space moguls.
You don't need the traction.
You don't need the traction. You don't need the balance. And he's also got that medieval mask with the gate, the grate on the front. I don't know where this character concept comes from. It's a striking visual. It always seemed out of place to me. Always, even in the New Gods, it seems out of place. But yeah, I don't know. It's unfortunate that they went with the black in the title, and it's the only major black character in the series.
Yeah, it's interesting because like it it does seem like the character itself, like it shows up, and it's clearly, he talks about like this is death, and then switches essence like immediately, like in the first few pages. It's a little confusing. Because you're introduced to this concept of death. So I'll crack open the issue here.
Right, and the Black Racer looks exactly the same when he first appears, hunting after Light Ray in space.
Yeah,
so
that's something.
Light Ray is going to die. That's what's set up. Light Ray is going to die, and then Metron appears with a boom tube to funnel the Black Racer to Earth, saving Light Ray's life. And then the Black Racer ends up stopping a drive-by shooting, essentially, and then imbuing his essence in this aerialized character.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about Light Ray much in the last videos. Let's talk about him for a second. Like he's like the kind of the opposite of Orion in a way. Like he's the typical like New Genesis god, I suppose. Like he's happy, he's flying around. His power is like light, you know, as opposed to the darkness of Apocalypse. He's handsome. He's like he has like red hair. Like he looks a lot like what Orion probably should be if Orion wasn't Darkseid's son.
Yeah, he's some combination of Apollo and Hermes, but the New Gods version of that. So he's got this whimsical side to him, but he also has this regal bearing, and he's got light powers, which makes sense for his character. He looks like a traditional superhero in a lot of ways, but he doesn't necessarily act like one. He acts more like one of those Greek gods. He is a good foil for Orion because he's representing light and Orion represents darkness. And Light Ray never seems conflicted. He seems to know exactly who he is, and he seems to celebrate life, and Orion is tortured and tormented. So it's a good contrast.
It is, and it opens up. This issue opens up. The Black Racer is after him. No idea why. It's just happening. You're just in the middle of it, which is kind of classic Kirby. And the same with the visuals on the Black Racer. Like as ridiculous as we were saying it is, it's so Kirby though.
It's excessive and spectacular at the same time, and it does have a visual style to it that is unmistakable. And grandeur. We talked about grandeur last time. The Black Racer is a grand character. Ridiculous, but grand.
Yeah. And like a lot of the characters here, it was later picked up by Grant Morrison to great effect. Like the Black Racer that he used in his, like that design was crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think Grant Morrison, he's one of the few writers to try to pick up on Kirby's writing style too. We talked about, again, last time that sometimes Kirby's writing gets derided, but the writing in New Gods seems really cool. The language Kirby uses, the heightened language and the declarative statements, Grant Morrison picks that up, especially in Final Crisis. He makes those it's almost word for word some of the same phrases right from the New Gods series. And it seems epic when Kirby does it, and Grant Morrison pulls it off too. And a lot of people derided Final Crisis when it came out and said, oh, it doesn't make any sense. It's pretty close to a Kirby comic, and that's why people thought that it didn't make sense, because it just jumps right from big idea to big moment without a lot of interconnected little beats along the way.
Yeah, I loved Final Crisis. Every time I think about it, I don't really. I did like the main series, but I think about that Superman 3D comic. Man, that's life altering. Like if you guys haven't read that, I'll show some footage of it here because it's so crazy and so perfect and good. Like it, and you can read it on your own without reading Final Crisis. It ties into that and it'll make more sense, I guess. But like you can just read it on its own. It's amazing.
Yeah, I guess I would say after rereading the New Gods stuff, is Final Crisis is Grant Morrison's remake of the New Gods. It's a lot of the same underlying plot threads that Kirby may or may not have fully explored, but he retells that. And Turpin is a main character who's one of the police officers in this series. But then he weaves in the Marv Wolfman and George Perez Crisis into that Superman 3D special. And so he's combining the Kirby verse with the Marv Wolfman Crisis verse. And he doesn't muddle it all together, but he kind of molds it into something that ultimately celebrates superheroes and celebrates the DC universe. I really like that story, that Final Crisis series. As you know, I did a whole series of blog posts about it, so it meant a lot to me at the time.
Me too. I remember. I mean, that's one of the Grant Morrison is one of the things me and you have bonded over. It's one of our main themes in common. I kind of miss that stuff. Like, are you reading his Green Lantern now?
Yeah, actually, I like it quite a bit. It does remind me of some of that Fourth World Final Crisis. It's the closest he's gotten to that since Final Crisis. He's trying to tap into that same vein.
Interesting. Yeah, I've only read like a tiny bit of it, and I was like, well, I'll come back when I can just read it all, and I haven't gotten back to it yet. But man, yeah, after reading this, I'll probably do it.
Yeah, it doesn't quite reach the same heights, and it has its flaws. And he seems to be playing around a little bit more. He doesn't have the same central focus, I think, that Final Crisis had, or even some of his better work. So it meanders and it is a little bit more of let me play in this playground and let me try out this experiment. But it at least is ambitious, and it gets to some commentary about creation and some commentary about heroes, which is the same thing Kirby's playing around with too.
Yeah, and those are some of my favorite things. Just like having someone play around. Because if you're gonna bother reading, new, like to me, I like older comics more than I like newer comics. I think as I get older, I guess that's a part of getting old. I don't know, but I find myself digging like newsprint older comics. But if I'm going to read newer stuff, like that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in. Like more, something like Grant Morrison. And speaking of Grant Morrison, I might as well mention this. I was thinking the other day about the way like Kirby like launches this line of connected books. Grant Morrison kind of did that too with the Seven Soldiers stuff.
That is true. Yeah. He wasn't writing and drawing all of it though.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, could you imagine?
Only Kirby can pull that off.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll ever happen again. I guess it just literally can't. Like I don't know anyone who could produce anything remotely, like even if you took a year, like who could do it? I don't know anyone that fast. I know people who are decently fast, but there's no one I know who could do that.
Yeah, I think one of the most ambitious creators now is Michel Fife, who does Copra. And Copra's one series. And it seems like a triumph that he's writing and drawing and coloring one series. He's like the only guy doing that. So the very thought that someone like Michel Fife would have enough time to do 4, even if they were bi-monthly, 2 per month, it's impossible. There's no way. But that's what Kirby was doing.
All right, well, getting back to this. So Light Ray is on the run from the Black Racer. He tries to use this crystal to get away from him, but then like it cuts back to Orion, who is with the gang again, and he gets some Earth clothes. It's like a little fashion show we get here.
And we get in this issue. I said last time, all the human characters always introduce themselves every time they appear. They don't quite do it in this issue. In the next issue, they do. So if you're reading them in sequence, you're like, okay, they've passed that phase where they have to state their names every time they talk. Oh, no, that comes back in issue 4. But what Orion does is he reveals his true face with the mother box, revealing that he's actually this grimaced Cro-Magnon visage, which he then covers up immediately. And again, as I mentioned, with Vince Colletta's inking, I don't know that he quite sells it that it's a very different face, especially in the next page when he comes out in the shadows again. He still doesn't look like handsome Orion. He's supposed to be, though. But yeah, he basically just says, I'm going to be a human because there's this secret war happening between Darkseid and the humans, and we've got to tackle it at the street level is essentially what he's implying here.
Yeah, even though they don't all introduce their names again, what they do work in is mentioning for the 100th time already that old guy is an insurance salesman. they never fail to work that in.
That's an important plot point. It is never picked up again, but it's mentioned all the time.
Yep. But yeah, you're right. He definitely just looks like when he's transforming and showing his bad face, it looks like bad lighting. It doesn't look like he's this other monstrous being. Which it could be kind of cool because it could be just kind of like, as a reader, not knowing anything, it could just be like the beginning of the hint, like just another tiny hint instead of like beating you over the head with it.
Yeah, if you look at that panel where he reveals himself on page 6 and then the first panel on page 7, and you showed that to anybody, they would say, oh, that's the same guy. He doesn't look like a different person. So it's just the lighting effect. But he's supposed to be this inhuman-looking beast. He will later look... and. Kirby changes his haircut later, too, to give him a part down the middle, because everybody knows that if you have a part down the middle, you are a monster.
So I don't know if you can see them behind me, but these like the New Gods action figures back here.
Oh, nice.
So those were the ones that were released at the time that the omnibus editions came out. I actually just finished getting all of them because I had most of them, but I never picked up Darkseid for whatever reason. And of course, that's the one that became super expensive. I don't want to tell you what it's, but I'll show. But speaking of Orion's face, I'll show you what that one looks like.
All right. Dramatic reveal. Yeah, I've never seen these figures up close. I've never seen what they look like with the.
They're really good. So like this one comes with 2 heads. They have these like little cuts. I don't know if you can see them, but like these little Kirby cuts.
Yeah.
So I love those. So like he comes with this normal head, and then he also comes with this crazy head. It's like over the top.
That is very different.
Yeah, it's nuts.
That head would not fit inside the helmet.
Definitely not. That's what a mother box is for. And they go into it like a lot of depth in this issue about the mother box, more so than they did before.
Yeah. And later on, the mother box has this power to actually bring the new god who died to Valhalla, essentially. Which I don't know if that power of the mother box has ever been used. I don't remember reading about that in any other comic book issue where the mother box can transport a fallen hero to the afterlife.
Yeah, and it also kind of so you're talking about the guy in the next issue, the water guy. Yeah, and so like the Black Racer shows up then as well. We can get into that, but I think he's involved with that. I think like maybe it's this synergy of like the mother box and the Black Racer takes him to the source. Yeah. All right, so it cuts back to Light Ray trying to ditch the Black Racer, and like you said, Metron like intervenes. So that again like shows you this almost omnipotent power that Metron has. Like he can thwart the god of death.
He can thwart death, exactly. And we don't know why he's doing it other than he just is. He's enigmatic throughout the whole series. Metron never reveals any motive at all. He just is there. And even though Highfather was suspicious of him because he represents this pure intellect, all Metron does is help out the new gods. He just helps the good guys.
Yeah. All right. So then there's like a splash page of the Black Racer, and it just looks amazing. Like he's on Earth. It's just wonderful. Like you said, it's preposterous and it's wonderful. I really wish Superpowers had done a figure of him, or like they could have done one in that series. I really wish they'd done Black Racer and Bug. Like those are the two that they never got to. But man, that they should have done. And Highfather as well. They didn't make a Highfather for that series.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't. I really pay attention to those when they came out, but they looked cool on the shelf.
Thank you. Yeah, they're good. I've thought about. This is a thing I've not really talked about, but I've gotten into making custom action figures here and there, and I've thought about making a custom Bug or Highfather for that would look like one of those, but I haven't gotten into that. I've done some custom Superpowers figures.
Amazing. I would love to see those.
I'll show you.
Sounds like a feature on the channel. Jason's custom figures.
It's completely and utterly ridiculous. So like this is a custom.
Wow.
Deathstroke.
What'd you make that out of?
So it's got I think the legs of Red Tornado and the torso of Aquaman. And then the rest is like, this stuff is like I sculpted on, and then some of these weapons are just from other figures, and the head I think is Red Tornado.
Amazing. Really cool. I dabbled in custom figures back in the Wizard days of the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I made, the only custom figure I ever actually made was a custom Spartan from Wildcats, because he seemed pretty easy to make. He doesn't have a lot of features and have a lot of costume details. And so I used a couple G.I. Joe figures and made a Spartan. And then that was it. And I was like, I'm done with custom figures. It didn't come out as well as I wanted it to. I moved on with my life. But I'm glad that you're keeping the torch alive, because that's really
cool. I am. I haven't done it in a while, but when I really enjoy doing it. I like quit drawing comics for a while just to make some figures.
Beautiful.
I liked it, but one of the things I liked about it was because it was the first time I was making something slightly artistic for myself, which is something I hadn't done in a long time. And I got a big kick out of that, which is something I'm doing again now, like that Darkseid painting I've been working on. It's for me. Like, I'm not selling that. It's for me. I'm going to hang it up, because I've never hung up anything of mine. And I was trying to do something that I like. A, I just wanted to like ink Kirby, but then B, like I wanted something for me.
That's great. Yeah, you'll have to show that Darkseid painting, the work in progress. It looks pretty amazing so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I started it in October, and we're in the middle of a pandemic where I'm stuck at home and I'm still not done with it.
It's your life's work.
Yeah, seriously. I work on it like a little, like for an hour every few days, essentially. All right, so then we get to the Sugar Man. Let's talk about the Sugar Man.
Kirby did have Well, he lived on the streets, and he wrote and drew some urban encounters, and so you have some violence on the streets that the Black Racer intercepts.
That's right. So there's this street thug who couldn't look more 70s. And he's taken out some guy called the Screamer, which I thought was that's his street name, I guess.
That's the street name.
And he takes him out, and then finds out that this Vietnam vet, who is like, you know, an injured vet who's like incapacitated, and he witnessed it, so now he's got to take him out. But no, that doesn't get to happen, because the Black Racer crushes the gun, walks through the wall, and then becomes this Vietnam vet.
Yeah, he saves the life of Willie Walker, who ironically is unable to walk.
Yeah.
And then he gives Willie Walker the power of the Black Racer, and then whenever Willie Walker wants to, he can just leave his body as if in astral form and become the Black Racer. While he's the Black Racer, he acts exactly the same as the Black Racer acted at the beginning of this issue. So I don't know what that means.
I also don't know, like, I think he's gone. Like, the dude's, like, Willie Walker is no longer in that hospital bed. He's just, there's like an empty room when he's the Black Racer. Is that what they don't?
But nobody
show
ever
that.
notices that. Nobody catches that.
That's
They're
crazy.
never like, where did Willie Walker go?
But like, it shows you on page 14, like he picks up the Black Racer's helmet, and like the previous Black Racer has turned to dust.
Right. And when he picks up the Black Racer suit, there's nobody in the bed. So you're right, it's not like astral form. It's as if he can physically get up and walk and become the Black Racer. So it would be an empty bed if anybody were to stumble in on Willie Walker's hospital room.
It's so crazy.
Or I guess his
I love
home, his bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, I guess he's at home and like his sister or somebody's taking care of him. But anytime she's like making a sandwich, he's out there killing people.
He's just a murderer. He's the embodiment of death, which means he murders everybody he encounters.
If she's in there like reading a book to him, nobody dies. Do you think, like, is he like in these comics? I know like later he's more like the embodiment of death in DC for a while, but in these books, do you think he's just like the death of like the embodiment of death of just the New Gods?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think a New God can die unless the Black Racer comes for them. I think
That
that's
makes
the
sense.
mythology Kirby's creating.
Which probably
right.
doesn't happen. It probably doesn't happen like every day. So maybe it's safe that he's someone who could occasionally like be monitored.
But also, if he is foiled in his attempt to kill a New God, they're fine. Like Light Ray avoids it. He doesn't go back for Light Ray at any point. He never fulfills that. He just is like, okay, I guess I'm not gonna bring Light Ray to the source.
Yeah, I'm wondering, maybe he needed Light Ray to appreciate his life a bit more. Like maybe that was just a lesson he was learning.
Yeah, I'm not sure the rules of the Black Racer make sense, because in the next issue when he does his duty and brings that water guy to the source, that guy's already dead. So it's like, okay, the Black Racer didn't actually end the life of this character.
Yeah.
When the character died, he escorted him to the afterlife. So I don't know what caused Light Ray to be in hot pursuit of Light Ray. I don't know why Light Ray was destined to die. We never learned that. So the rules are a little bit ambiguous.
What we're saying is
visuals.
What we're saying is, in a world where a guy in outer space is using ski poles, don't look for rules that make sense.
Yes.
Death doesn't make sense. That's a good lesson, actually. Death doesn't have rules. It just, other than like you're just gonna die.
Exactly. That's the lesson. Death is unpredictable.
So what we find out is Sugarman is connected to Intergang.
And you can tell Intergang because when they pull out their weapons look like Jack Kirby drew them. Drew the heck out of them. They're crazy tech weapons. And so that's how you know they're connected to Intergang.
They have a bomb, and it's just like the craziest looking bomb you've ever seen. It looks like it's a Kirby device. That's the way you would describe it.
It's like Kirby was creating the most inconvenient kitchen tool that also was nuclear powered. That's what the bomb looks like.
And so once it shifts to this Intergang story, it essentially becomes like a crime comic for the rest of the issue.
Yeah, Orion, who's a New God who flies around using the Astro Force in his harness, instead wears a fedora and rides shotgun in a sedan to go investigate Intergang.
And also Intergang has been introduced in the Fourth World at this point. So they were kind of set up in Jimmy Olsen, and was even like, so Morgan Edge was working for them, who was Clark Kent's boss at the time. So so the Inner Gang has been, so when they say Inner Gang here, like if you're reading just the New Gods, you're like, this is a new thing, but it's not. It's been set up a bit. And what turns out, like, they're literally all working for Darkseid, which is a super weird way for an alien god to invade Earth, just take over the mob.
Just equip the mob with some high-tech weapons, and that's exactly how you'll conquer the world. But he doesn't even want to conquer the Earth. He wants to learn the anti-life equation, which is somewhere in the human psyche and represents a loss of choice. So he's going to do that by giving gangsters bigger weapons. Yes.
That's right.
Check. But it is really impressive that Kirby puts in all these subplots and seeds this whole world. So he doesn't just say, I'm creating this comic, and then Darkseid's going to send his army of parademons to attack Earth, which would be like the Hollywood version of doing the story, right? Instead, he lays this foundation of Clark Kent's boss is involved in this conspiracy, and the conspiracy involves alien weaponry. He layers all that in, which he didn't have to do. He could just throw the action in. So the fact that he was layering in these subplots and these underlying conspiracies is pretty cool. The conspiracies don't make a lot of sense, but they're so cool.
Yeah, some of it doesn't add up. That's one of the things I was thinking about. This is going to sound crazy to even say this. So when I think of good comics, I think of like a solid story, beginning, middle, end, story arc, like, and I think that's just because, you know, most of the stuff I've enjoyed are more graphic novels kind of a thing. You know, because when I started making comics, I was inspired more by indie comic graphic novels and stuff. And so when I think of good comics, that's what I think of, like a strong story. This doesn't have that. So I was thinking, like, is New Gods good comics? It's good. It's definitely good comic issues and superhero kind of stuff, but is it like, it's not like a solid story, and not just because he didn't get to finish it, because it's like what we've been saying, it's just idea after idea without a lot of follow through, which is its own kind of thing. But I don't know if it's like super good comics.
It's not good reading in that traditional sense. But I also would wonder if that's completely true, that a solid beginning, middle, and end is a satisfying comic. I would argue it's probably not enough to be a satisfying comic. There probably has to be something that's surprising. If there's no surprises as a reader, it probably doesn't resonate. It probably doesn't. You might enjoy it because maybe the craftsmanship is there, but I don't think it's one of your favorite comics. I think if you think about the things that are your favorite, there's probably something about it that was surprising. So Kirby takes that idea of surprising the reader and he slaps it in every couple of pages, and he might forget about the narrative logic in order to go for the surprise, because there's a ton of surprises in New Gods. And that to me is what makes it really great comics, the amount of just ambition and surprise.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I never really thought of that element being such an integral part to the way he tells stories, but it definitely is. More so in this than probably anything of his that I've read. Maybe in The Eternals would be another good example. But like if you're just reading like Fantastic Four, like you kind of know what's going to happen. Like they're going to fight Doctor Doom and they're going to win. But stuff like that, like you don't know what the Black Racer is going to do because like we said, it makes no sense.
But even if you read the early Fantastic Four issues, early on they fight a giant whale monster out of nowhere in the middle of Manhattan. And so, and if you think about Fantastic Four as it evolved, the Inhumans, what became Adam Warlock, Galactus, even Doctor Doom, there are a lot of surprises. There's a lot of things that are not the traditional, oh, here's a supervillain and the Fantastic Four has to thwart them. He threw a lot of twists and turns and surprises in the Fantastic Four. And I think that was his signature series before the New Gods. Fantastic Four was the one that was the most Kirby-like. Obviously, we associate Galactus and Silver Surfer with him because it was like his primal creative force coming through, more so than in his other Marvel work. Maybe Thor to some extent, the Tales of Asgard probably. But Thor, to me, has always looked great. But there's like, what's the great batch of Thor issues that Kirby drew? I couldn't name them.
But I could name the Simonson ones, of course.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, when I think, because I haven't read a ton of Kirby's Marvel stuff actually, but not the early, not the '60s stuff, I should say. So yeah, but you're right. Yeah, I can think of like what it would look like, but yeah, it's not like, oh, this issue is the issue. I don't think of that when I think of his Thor stuff. And when I think of Silver Surfer, I think of Ron Lim and Jim Starlin, for
That's
better
your
or for
age,
worse.
my friend.
Oh,
That's the age that you are.
I know. Well, like the other thing I was thinking, I was saying the last episode about how when I thought of Kirby early on, like I was like, oh, that's your grandpa's comics. I'm Liefeld and McFarlane. I think I learned a lot about who Kirby was because of Liefeld. Like he loved Kirby.
Yeah. Those guys celebrated Kirby, and they brought Kirby into Image early on. The Phantom Force made Kirby more money than any of his previous comics ever made him. So
Yeah,
they were part of the Kirby Reclamation project for sure. And then before that, in the '80s, you had the big fight to get Kirby back his artwork and to get him some credit for the work he had done. So that was ongoing in the Comics Journal for all those years. But as far as what was on the newsstand or what was even on the direct market shelves, Kirby was absent for a lot of that time, and other than some of the toy tie-in comics, until Liefeld and McFarlane resurrected his reputation in the industry. And so it's cool to see that as a younger reader.
yeah. I don't think I knew much about him other than like he's the guy who created the stuff, like, and he drew the war comics. Like that's what I thought of. But yeah, like Liefeld straight up had a character based on him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved that stuff, and I think that's one of the things that early on it was just like, okay, if they love him, he might have something going on then, which is utterly ridiculous, but that's what I thought. So these guys, the inner gang, try to set off this bomb, and then the Black Racer kind of gets involved, and like he stopped. I don't know. They stopped the bomb. There's a lot of use of mother box. They're using mother boxes left and right, and they arrest part of the inner gang. And like, no, I don't know how Miranda rights go into this, but like, Orion is not a cop. He's just like, I think like, so one of the guys that is part of their human crew is a cop.
Well, Dave Lincoln is a special investigator.
Okay, so he's not even a cop.
I'm not sure what authority he has. I think he's like a private eye. I don't think he works for the police, does he?
I was thinking he was a detective, but maybe you're right. Yeah.
Maybe he does. I don't remember how he intersects with Turpin later on.
Yeah, I'll have to look that one up. But yeah, so Black Racer, so they stop the bomb. Black Racer goes back to his room, and he's just Willie Walker again.
Just in time for his sister to walk in and check on him.
And so then, like, in these Baxter reprints, there's like a one-page like Calabac thing, and I'm not sure if that even appeared in the original comics or if that's one of the new pieces.
I think that's the opening page of. Well, I guess it's not because it's not listed as page number 1. Yeah. I'm not sure what's in Calabac.
Yeah, page number 1 is that's what I wrote down was Metron takes a new Apocalypse kid on a field trip to the Eternals. It looks like, because like page 1 of issue 4, Metron has this kid in the Mobius chair, and he's taking him to a planet where like these prehistoric, human type creatures are fighting like mutants from the Eternals.
So this is one of the great parts about the New Gods, is this character, this boy, who's like, I don't know, 8 years old, maybe 10. His name is Isaac, and he doesn't really play a role in the New Gods at all. They set up this character. He's Metron's protege. He's learning the mysteries of the universe from Metron. Never really does anything in the entire run. Does appear later in the Hunger Dogs graphic novel.
Oh.
And plays a pivotal role. So over a decade later, he picks up this plot thread and then takes it home. But Isaac, we're thinking about the mythological overtones. Isaac is probably named after Isaac from the Bible. And Isaac from the Bible is Abraham's son, who God told Abraham to sacrifice his son to God. So I do think that's what Kirby's playing with here. So Kirby's bringing Judeo-Christian mythology into this Greek mythology, and this Isaac character is supposed to be someone who I think is Metron's sacrifice to the world of the intellect and the world of knowledge, because right now he's an innocent young boy. A decade and a half later, you will see what happens to him.
Yeah, I've still not read Hunger Dogs, but that is very interesting. I just that you went way deeper on it than I thought. I was like, oh, this is a silly field trip. But Kirby does this a lot. He does this a lot in the New Gods, or in all the Fourth World books, where they're just little snippets, like 3 or 4 pagers of like side New Gods or New Genesis characters.
Yeah, he does try to create a tapestry of the life of these characters, separate from this conflict between Darkseid and Orion, or separate from this plot Darkseid has to infiltrate the mob and give them better weapons. Yeah, he shows. So this field trip does feel like a field trip right now. It does pay off in about 15 more years.
That's awesome. But yeah, so it's like 4 pages. Yeah, and then he just returns them to Highfather. Those pages look really good.
They look good. He looks like he's exploring something he really is in love with. And that's part of it with Kirby too, is you don't know how much is part of the narrative and how much is part of him. He wants to draw something cool. And so he's going to figure out how to put his characters, small little figures with something cool happening in the foreground and background.
Yep.
And then we meet this god who has died. Sigrin, who we've never met Sigrin. He's one of the apparently New Gods, and he's some water-related character. He's like Aquaman of the New Gods, but cooler. And he's got a beard. But he's dead all of a sudden. The first time we're introduced to this character, he is dead.
Yeah, it is weird that he wasn't even like in the background, or didn't have a little short story like we were just talking about. But Orion seems to be like pretty close to him. I assume he's close to all of them, but I don't know. Like that's another thing I was thinking, like how many New Gods are there? There's like a whole planet of them, but
right.
I don't really know what that means. Like, do they only inhabit and live in that floating city, or are they on the planet too? There's so much. I assume other people that took over the stories later maybe touched on that. I have no idea, but that's something that, like, some detail I would like to have just to know.
Right? Are they all exactly the same level of hierarchy of the New Gods? I don't think that's explored. But this idea of the first time we meet this character, he's being pulled out of the river because he's dead. Can you even think of another comic book where the first time we meet a character who is supposed to be of significance, they're dead? And then that's really it. Like, they appear, they have their death scene, or they have their post-death scene, and then you never mention them again. I can't think of another comic that does that.
Yeah, I can't either. It is weird. It just and then so like they pull him out of the water. This part's crazy. The Black Racer shows up, and like the entire dock explodes.
Yep.
Does he do, like, is that part of the Black Racer? Like, if he takes you, like, you better buckle up for an explosion every time?
Well, the source is a flaming hand.
Yeah.
So I guess there's some sort of fire connected with the source. But Orion does the cool move where while it's exploding behind him, he's walking toward the camera with his tie whipping in the wind, and he's totally stoic, and he's describing what's happening. He's being reunited with the source, this dead character. But at the end of that page, his fist is raised in fury, and he says, "Ride the tempest, Sigrin. Enter the cosmic fire. The source will take you as a warrior who has given all." Orion doesn't usually talk that way in any other part of the comic, but this is his big moment.
Yeah, I think that's born out of this loss that he's feeling for a character we've never met. It's so crazy. I love it. So then, this is my favorite part out of these 2 issues. So the Black Racer returns yet again to his room. His sister's there. And then you turn to page 10, and this is my absolute favorite page out of all these. It's creepy Peeping Tom Darkseid.
This page of Darkseid creeping around the corner, eyes peering to his right. It's one of the all-time great pages. It's so hilarious. In my memory, this is the first appearance of Darkseid. Like, when I think about Darkseid in the New Gods, I always picture this being his first appearance. In fact, his first appearance is in the Adirondack chair, but this is his first appearance in my memory. It's just such a hilarious image. And the fact that he's got like 3 big thought balloons, it's the most interior monologue we get of Darkseid in the whole series.
And he's just like peeping I mean, it seems like he's watching Willy Walker, right?
Yeah, I guess so. He's watching both Willy Walker and Orion teaming up with the Scooby Gang, and then he's got that. I don't know how powerful thought balloons are. It's not like a soliloquy on stage, but his thought balloon ends with, "And their trap that can kill a god." Like, Darkseid's a god. Does Darkseid go around and talk like? If I said to kill a human, that's not as powerful. To kill a god sounds like amazingly cosmic, but Darkseid's already a god, so it's just his regular people. It still sounds cool though.
It also has this line. I love this line where it says, "He says war is but the cold game of the butcher." Like, that's who's complaining about Kirby's writing? I mean, I was, we had Jimmy Olsen, and you were for the Forever people, but like that line's amazing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other comics from 1971 that can top that line. Agreed.
It's a good line, and that panel, I think it's that his eyes are shifted. It's just that's what makes it so good. And there's such like good use of shadow. It's so great.
Well, you never see Darkseid with expressive eyeballs ever.
Yeah.
He's always got that menacing glare, but here he's got eyeballs that are just peeping around the corner. It's comical. But then it's followed by one of the scenes where everyone in the Scooby Gang has to introduce themselves again and say their name and their role.
Yeah, they all, and the last guy who's like, you only see him peeking over the shoulder because they're all like saying who they are and what they do. And he says, "And me, young but cool Harvey Lockman." So it's like I was literally praising that butcher line, and then there's just like this guy who peeks up like, "And me."
So funny.
It's like a sitcom. It's crazy. This is literally like imagine like galactic biblical proportions and then cut to a sitcom. That's what happens with these Scooby Gang guys, and I love it, and it's part of the part of the charm, but it's such
surprise
a weird...
I was talking about. And I think the tonal shifts are what, when people complain about Kirby's writing, they're talking about those weird tonal shifts, and he's just like smashing these genres together, and they're discordant, but it's constantly entertaining. I love it.
It's so good. And then, so again, like I was saying earlier, it delves back into these unknown expansive powers of the Mother Box, and it kind of like shows like the Scooby Gang. It shows them like what's going on. Like they get to like watch some stuff that the Inner Gang is up to, because they're trying to figure out. So one of the big plot things that's going on in this issue is that the Inner Gang and these people working for Darkseid have a jammer, which is what they say the word jammer like 1,000 times.
The quote unquote jammer.
Yeah, and it's keeping Orion's Mother Box from locating any people from Apocalypse, and so they got to go destroy this jammer. And so Orion uses his Mother Box to kind of show them like it's these humans get to like peek behind the veil of this mysterious technology, and it shows them like things that that they otherwise wouldn't be able to see, which I thought is interesting.
Yeah, and they're spying using the Mother Box technology on Snaky Doyle. He's playing pool. He's in a pool hall, and he's connected to the jammer somehow. And you can tell Snaky Doyle's a bad guy because, unlike New Gods, he has a mustache. So he must be bad.
And he's smoking and playing pool. And when I was a kid, if you're smoking and playing pool, don't go near you. That's bad news bears.
No, the Black Racer should take your life if you're doing those things.
Definitely.
You're a bad person.
So now they know what to do. They know where this jammer is, or at least that's what the Mother Box shows them. And then so I guess they go. It's literally like a little caper.
So again, we're repeating ourselves, but I'm not sure Orion needs these other people at all. I don't know what they bring to this particular escapade that he could not have just done himself. He is a god.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of, I'm wondering, so obviously he doesn't need them. He is a god. Is it just a way to like bring in the audience? But why are there so many of them? If you're going to do that, like if I was writing a story where I wanted the audience to kind of like have an avenue into these godlike characters, that would make sense. Like Robin is to Batman. Like a little kid reading a Batman comic, he can get into it and see himself as Robin. And so maybe that's my only like theory is like, hey.
Well, the cliche way to do it is you give Orion a human love interest, and then he and the girl go on this adventure, and she's representing humanity and he's representing the divine presence. No. Kirby doesn't include any love interest at all, which is another refreshing thing. No love interest. Instead, you've got this ragtag group, including Victor Lanza, the insurance salesman, who are on this mission to infiltrate a gang funded by an extraterrestrial power, and they're way out of their element, but they go along with Orion anyway.
Yep. Knowing that he doesn't need them, you're right. Yeah, that is. I hadn't really thought about the fact that there's no love interest, because that would be like the Thor thing to do, to have the Jane Foster character. But
Exactly.
So they I love this guy. So on page 18, the insurance salesman goes in. So at this point, they've represented themselves as like an actual like mob gang, the Orion gang.
The Orion gang. O''Ryan gang.
And now, so like they're trying to join Intergang, I guess. They're going to be absorbed. The Orion gang, which was just formed like a day ago, but they already have this.
Jason Horn, how much you played role-playing games. But if you ever play a role-playing game, there's invariably the characters come up with the idea of disguising themselves and trying to infiltrate the organization. That's a classic role-playing game trope. So apparently that's what we're seeing here. Let's don some fedoras and infiltrate Intergang for some reason. And they do.
Awesome. But this dude's on page 18, the leader of this sect of the Intergang, has his feet propped up on the table with a fishing pole. And he's like trying to use the hook of the fishing pole to pull a trigger on this guy who gave him up. I love it.
You got to shoot Snaky Doyle for giving him up. Right.
So
that's another Kirby surprise. Of all the ways that you can show a menacing crime boss, holding a fishing pole that is trying to pull a hook to fire a gun is not one I would ever think of. That's why Kirby's a genius.
That's right. And the other thing I was thinking that we haven't talked about, actually, so part of Kirby's contract to do these Fourth World comics was he also did 2 black and white magazines. And one of them was a crime magazine called Spirit World. And I'm wondering, like, he had some, like, crime stuff he wanted to get out of his system. And I'm wondering how much of that, like, how he just had stuff he wanted to do, some crime stuff he wanted to get out of his system. So he injected that into this. I wonder how much. Have you ever seen that, the Spirit World issue?
I have. Yeah. And he talks about, in the interviews with Kirby, he talks about growing up in New York and the street gangs and the mob life. And he doesn't describe it in a ton of detail. He just talks about how dangerous it was. And so for him, that life, it's real. It's not just some movie version of it. Like, he actually knew these guys who were bad dudes. And yet later in his life, when he comes back to this in the 70s, he doesn't want to celebrate it, but he clearly wants to explore it and look at it through the lens of these superhero or these cosmic comic books. It's interesting that he revisits that theme. He does not need to in this New Gods series. There's nothing about the New Gods that needs guys in fedoras and sedans driving around solving crimes. But he puts it in there anyway.
Yeah, I'm wondering. So, like, when I'm approaching my work, I often, like, I'll often have something I want to draw. Like, I want to get it out of my system. I get interested in it, and I want to draw it. And at this point, like, he's drawn hundreds of comics. Like, he invented romance comics, all that stuff. So, and he's done crime before, but, like, I think he just wanted to do it. So they find the jammer, and Orion finally, like, ditches his Earth costume and brings out the Astro Glider. That's a thing we've not talked about. So he has the Astro Force, which is kind of like the cosmic force that Silver Surfer has. It's this internal power that he taps into. But he also has this glider that lets him fly. So, like, Light Ray can fly, but, like, Orion needs this glider? I don't know.
Not just that, but the glider is weird looking. And it forces Orion to be hunched over. And I wonder if that's also, because Kirby could have designed anything. He could have meant any cool, if he needed to use some kind of power for vehicular support, he could have created any kind of contraption, but he created this thing that causes Orion to be hunched over, almost brutish, as opposed to Light Ray, who's always flying, carefree, arms spread open. And so it must have been some kind of visual representation of the duality between those characters, because the Astroglider is a weird-looking contraption. It doesn't look heroic.
Yeah, you're right. It's really hard to draw too. I've tried to, I've tried to draw,
Yeah.
and it also it's equipped with like guns and stuff. So it also speaks to his like war mentality, like, because he's not like you said, he's not like Orion where he's just flying around looking happy. He's flying around on a vehicle of war.
Yeah.
Hunched
Yeah, a
over,
war chariot, right? A chariot that is powered by the cosmic or the astral force.
And so like they finally destroy the jammer, and then it kind of
that
like
reveal of the jammer is really cool. It reminds me of the coolest James Bond scene you never saw, right? Where the villain clicks well, he's the fisherman, I guess. So he clicks the fish, and the fish opens a panel in the wall, and you see the jammer, which is this Kirby technology revealed. That's a really cool image. And I think it shows the contrast between the street level stuff and the cosmic stuff about as well as anything.
Yeah, it really shows you like this isn't what you thought. Like these guys are tapped into something else. And so but then it like really like takes you into what's going to be coming up in the next issue. So they finish up they blow up the jammer, and then he goes underwater to find out what happened to his Seagern friend, and that's when we get a little peek at what's this guy's name? It's not Deep.
The
So it's
Deep
like
Six are the villain, the apocalyptic villains who inhabit the water, but I don't know who this individual character is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think he's the Spawn, right?
I don't think he's the Spawn. Maybe he is. He might be the Spawn.
We'll
The
figure
Spawn
it
is
out.
revealed in more detail in the next issue. But I think it's interesting the way these characters describe themselves, because the Deep Six are basically saying, we rule this territory. So let me get this straight. These gods from Apocalypse, these aquatic new god villains, have been hanging out in the East River, and the East River is their domain. Like, when did they get there, and how much territory do they control now, and why are they hanging out in the East River? And we never find out those things, but Orion now has to confront these aquatic menaces.
Yeah, I wonder if he just wanted to be like, I want to draw some underwater stuff. That's what I'm doing. And I wonder like how long it takes to get something in his head, and he's probably already like drawing it like before he really thinks about any direction. He's probably like, water. I haven't done water yet. I'm already a page in. What's the water stuff going to be? It's going to be whatever I'm drawing right now. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't. But yet it works as this contrast between this. They've gone from godlike in outer space to street level. Now they're going aquatic. I could just plumbing the depths. It fits into those cliches of the hero's journey of going underground and going under into the underworld. So he's following those archetypal patterns, but I don't think he was conscious of that at all. I think he loved reading about that stuff. He loved embracing that archetypal energy of mythology, and it plays out in his work, but it definitely is a surprise. There's no way that you would predict anything that happens in these two issues. After reading issues 1 and 2, if you were to then plot it out and say, this is what happens in 3 and 4, nope, you would never have come up with a Black Racer. You never would have come up with a random new god dying and underwater creatures killing him. You wouldn't even have come up with Darkseid supplying these mobsters with technology. Nothing. But it's so cool.
Yeah, I wonder. So by the time he's penciling these issues, probably, or at least maybe probably like 3 or 4, like issue 1 has probably hit the stands at that point. So I'm wondering what kind of effect that had. So he's probably seen this, the reaction for the first time too.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I don't know that I've read anything that talks about Kirby reacting to the readers. I know he would react maybe to we talked last time about the fans who would come and visit him and just hang out with him, the young fans who would talk to him. I don't know that he paid attention to the reaction of readers. I don't even know if he would have gotten that feedback, because other than the letters column, There was a fanzine world, but I don't know how much he was exposed to what was being written about in the fanzines. I've not seen anything like that. So who knows? Who knows how much he was reacting to reader response, if at all?
Yeah, that's true. Yep. All right. Well, so those are the two issues, man. Like those were, like you said, I don't like. You would have expected galactic battles of some sort, like outer space. Maybe the New Gods invade, or maybe the people of Apocalypse invade New Genesis. Maybe that's what I would have guessed, but good gracious, no.
Or even Darkseid sending some more bad guys to fight Orion. Like, oh, Orion's here on Earth. I better stop him. No, he doesn't really do that. He just lurks around the corner and then lays a trap for Orion in the water. It's all very, very subtle what Darkseid's planning here.
And I think what it speaks to, though, is that he's been planning this for a while. Like, and Orion didn't know this, so like he's uncovering. I mean, he has all this conspiracy going on with a mob. So clearly he's been up to this for a while, because like in the first issue, Orion goes to Apocalypse to confront Darkseid, and he's not there, and he didn't know that. So like I think he's like really realizing like, oh, this is bigger than I thought. There's a fisherman there's a fisherman in a gang involved. This is way bigger than I thought.
And just this depiction of Darkseid is so different from who Darkseid would later become in the DC universe. Like he is physically intimidating because of the way he looks. He's a giant rock guy. But he never uses his physicality at all. He could be a tiny little spineless person and the plot would be the same. He's using intermediaries to conduct his business, even more so than Doctor Doom. I mean, Doctor Doom would throw down with a Fantastic Four now and then. Darkseid doesn't throw down with anybody. In fact, he only uses his powers, even in later issues, against his subordinates. He doesn't ever use his physicality or his cosmic abilities against anybody on the other side. He's really he's like a Machiavellian character behind the scenes, which is not the way Darkseid is depicted later in the DC universe.
That's fun. Yeah, he just sits in his Adirondack chair and lets Brola do all the punching. You're right.
Yeah, poor Brola. Alas, poor Brola.
All right. Well, thanks, man. Thanks for doing this again.
Awesome. It's great to talk about these comics.
Yep. So next issue is 5 and 6, right? And we're introduced to Todd McFarlane's Spawn, everybody.
The first appearance of Spawn.
That's right. So buckle up. That's coming. All right. Well, thank you for watching, everybody. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Follow Tim on Twitter.
Tim Callahan on Twitter.
Just at Tim Callahan. Look him up.
Right.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.